Welcome back to another episode of the Pitch to Purchase podcast. I am your host, Lisa Rabel. Now, this month we're talking about how every role influences revenue. Every role touches revenue. And this time I'm really excited because in this episode, we're going to be talking to Rick from Living as a Leader and looking at it from the leadership's perspective. Now, why is that important? Because when leadership gets involved and understands how every role touches revenue, communications increase, efficiencies increase, productivity increases, and revenue grows because of all of that. So it's extremely important to look at this from a leadership perspective, because what I have found is that what leadership does is they say sales is in charge of revenue and marketing is in charge of leads, and everybody else stay in their lane, which drives me insane. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about how leadership affects every role touching revenue. So normally I do my WTF moment a little bit later in the podcast, but I'm going to give it to you right away because it sets up why we're talking about this. It sets up why leadership it starts with leadership when it comes to every role touching revenue. You see, because what I've heard in so many organizations is that sales is in charge of revenue, marketing is in charge of bringing in leads, and everybody else just do your job and stay in your lane. WTF? Really? If everybody else in the organization doesn't understand how their role touches revenue, then the person answering the phone, are they being nice? Or are they like, what do you want? Believe me, I've called companies and that's what it sounds like. And then once the sale is made and it goes to operations or production, is the project manager miscommunicating? Do they know exactly what's going on? Do they know how this happens? And then the other thing that happens is that, like, if marketing is saying one thing and sales is saying another thing and production is saying another thing and this person's saying another thing, there's a huge disconnect and a misalignment in the customer experience. And the customer's like, WTF, what's going on here? And what's interesting is that I've heard this so many times. I have heard this so many times, both as a marketing director and as a consultant. They blame marketing for the leads. Yeah, that's the problem. It's marketing's fault for bringing a bad lead. No, because if you have a misalignment, that's not a role problem in your organization. That's a leadership problem. So please, if you're a leader in an organization or an up-and-coming leader in an organization, please pay attention, because this is going to make your life so much easier. So let me take you through a real-life scenario. A real-life client experience scenario. So what happens when a client needs what you sell? What's the first thing that they do? They realize they have a need. So what do? They go online, right? And they do research. So what's out there? Your website, your social media, all of those type ads, all of those types of things that they can find. So that's where the revenue starts. And that's marketing. So let's say that you are able to be one of the, let's say 3 finalists that they researched that you can solve their problem, and they either send you an email or they give you a phone call, right? So there's research out there that say that 78% of buyers will go with the first person who responds to them. Yeah, 78% of buyers. That's in B2B and in B2C. And so what happens is that if they send you an email, how quickly is sales responding to that? And if they give you a phone call, does the receptionist understand enough about the business to be able to answer some baseline questions before it goes to sales? Okay, let's say by some miracle that it gets to sales and sales does their job and they close the deal. So receptionist touches revenue, sales touches revenue. So now we've got marketing, we got the receptionist, and we've got sales. They're all touching revenue. What happens after that? Well, depending upon if you have a service or a product that you're selling, does it go to manufacturing? Does it go to production? Is operations involved? Is finance involved because they've got to send the invoice? And what does that look like in the customer experience? And then there's shipping, and then there's fulfillment, and then there's all of these things that have to happen before a customer is satisfied with the end results. So every role along the way has touched revenue. And so, what I want to talk about today specifically is the leadership of all of those departments, the leadership role that you play as a leader in your company or even an up and coming leader. And even if you're not a leader in your organization, don't stop the podcast. Because a lot of times, what we're finding is that when you manage up, and that's a term for you see an error and you go up to the management level, your manager's level, your supervisor's level, and say, hey, I noticed there's a scenario, there's a gap in our client experience that we're not doing very well. And so what I want to do is I want to bring it to your attention. So whether you're a leader or not in your organization, the information in this podcast is extremely important. This is something that I say. So the quote section of the podcast today is actually me and what I say to leaders. When I say that if you solely depend on sales to own revenue, then you don't have a revenue problem, you have a dependency problem. If you're specifically depending on sales only to lead the charge in revenue, you're depending on them. And I need to ask the Dr. Phil question. How's that going for you? Rick and I have such a great conversation about how leadership's role in revenue that I'm actually going to cut my part of this episode short. So what I want to talk to you about is that Rick and I go pretty deep sometimes, but I promise you stay in there and listen because he has some mic drop moments. He has some golden nuggets for you to implement immediately. And there are things that he has seen and advice that he has for you that you will take home immediately and you can apply. So, all right. Well, it's time for the interview section of this episode. So here's Rick. Take a listen. We have come to one of my favorite parts of the Pitch to Purchase podcast where I introduce my guest today. Now, I've known Rick for a while. I'm not going to say how long because that just ages me. But I used to work with Rick when I was doing sales and marketing at Living as a Leader. And I'm going to tell you this right now. The things that I learned, even though I was just doing sales and marketing, not just, even though my role was sales and marketing at Living as a Leader, the things that I learned there, I apply almost every day. It's amazing the things that I can I can point to either how I behave or how I interact with leaders based on what I learned. So my time there was just wonderful and I learned a ton. So all right, first of all, Rick, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little about you and Living as Leader as a whole.
Sure. So thank you, Lisa. And I'm really glad to hear that what you learned at Living as a Leader is accompanying you through each day. And
Oh
that's,
yeah.
get it? Living as a leader, right? So who you are is how you lead. And so at Living as a Leader, we work to help leaders adopt a leadership mindset and skill set that they take into every day. That's our sweet spot, right? Leadership development. My background is I had the good fortune to have a career as a student of human nature. I was a high school English teacher and loved literature, and literature is all about human nature, right? The stories of
Yeah.
people. Then I went back to school and got a degree that allowed me to work as a clinical psychotherapist for 18 years. And again, a deep dive into human nature and understanding people, how they get stuck, how it can help them get unstuck, how things work, how the mind works, how emotion works.
Yeah.
And then back in 97, I started to translate what I know about human nature and psychology into leadership development. And it's the perfect constellation for my talents and my interests. And I've had a blast as a leadership development guy because who you are is how you lead. And my commitment is to help people become better leaders and help them become better people because happier people, better people, more emotionally well and confident people make for better leadership. What do you call a bad golfer with good clubs?
A bad golfer.
A bad golfer, right?
Oh, I got it right. Oh,
You
I should
got
know
it.
that one.
You got it. You got it. So the skills, right? The skill sets of leadership are brought to life by human beings. The value of clubs are brought to life by the hands that hold them. And so on the way of becoming a better leader, we have to become better people too. And
Yes.
that's what I'd like to be able to integrate for your listeners today is how leadership and who we are as people come together as one. And so I'm eager to have the conversation and hear your questions.
Yeah, I'm so glad you joined me. And I've seen it firsthand working with people that I know. Rick works with people that I also work with, and I've seen firsthand how it impacts. There's this massive ripple effect throughout the entire organization. But I'm getting ahead of myself because that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about the fact that leadership. It starts with leadership. It starts with how leaders act and how that affects everything else in the organization. So unlike other podcast guests, I'm a mean one and I really don't send the questions ahead of time. So, Rick, are you ready?
Sure, let's go.
Okay, let's go. All right. So, from your experience with leaders, how do the pressures, responsibilities, and the fear of failure really start to change how leaders show up every day? Before they became a leader, they're one way, and then they become a leader. Like, what happens there?
Well, so let's just start with this framing. Um, Under stress, we become more self-centered and
Yeah.
less other-centered, right? Under stress,
Hmm.
fear, responsibility, how is it going to look? My focus is on me, how I'm looking, and when I'm in distress, I look for ways to minimize that distress. And so when a leader is assuming responsibility for controlling others, now let's differentiate. Leaders, we define, living as a leader, we define leaders as those who get results through others. So
Yep.
as a leader, I'm vulnerable to what you do under my leadership because it exposes me and the quality of my leadership, much in the same way as when little kids are tearing around the grocery store, it reveals the quality of parenting that they have.
Mm.
That can be
Yeah.
the mindset. So then I become more self absorbed. I think more about me and I become afraid that my people, right, are not going to represent me well. So the emotion of fear is generating a sense or a need for control. And guess what? There's only one kind of human nature. Nobody likes being controlled by others.
Right.
So
Yeah.
when I'm taking care of me and I'm afraid that you aren't going to be representing me well, I can go into control mode and human beings resist control. Think about a toddler. Even a toddler does not like being controlled, and they're very clear that they don't like being controlled, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's true of all people. There's only one kind of human nature. So when leaders become self absorbed and afraid, people become a vulnerability and then they try and control people. And guess what the response is when someone's trying to control others? Resistance, okay, upset,
Hmm.
hurt,
Yep.
fear. And now, instead of working in a collaborative fashion to get results, we have a control resistance dynamic that impacts the way people feel, the way they show up at work, and what they do to create balance with someone who has authority and is controlling them.
Yeah.
All kinds of misbehaviors can be generated by that. So we don't manage people because that implies control. We manage agreements we make collaboratively with people. That's the difference. That's the difference that we strive for.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because quite honestly, I've had both kinds of leaders. I've had the overbearing, micromanaging, controlling
Mhm.
leaders, and then I've had the leaders who've given me the authority and the confidence to just run with whatever my task was. And it's amazing the results you can get with one leader versus another leader. Yeah, because what are some common leadership behaviors that you've seen that reinforces that strong positive connection with their team? And on the opposite side, what behaviors have you seen that probably break that connection between a leader and their team?
Okay. So human beings are social animals. We
Yeah.
like connections, we like relationships. And so when a leader invests in relationships with teams, they get to know people as people. They help people then accomplish the dream of their life by bringing their talents to the workplace and helping them grow those talents and at the same time creating greater value for the organization, getting better results.
Yeah.
So when people feel a strong connection with their leader, they know that their leader cares about them, empowers them, develops them, helps them even when they're not doing well, that we're on the same team. We're always keeping people on our side as we lead them through challenging times, whether it's externally challenging or internally challenging, because I'm struggling. I might be in a learning curve. I might have just been given new responsibilities and I'm struggling because I'm getting used to those new responsibilities and it's not in my mastered area yet. So when leaders build strong relationships and work collaboratively with people to help them be successful in the workplace, because we do not have the ability to control people, we do have the ability to create a setup for success. And
Mm.
leaders owe people a setup for success. Now let's stipulate there's always constraints, right? Nobody has the ideal situation. But within the constraints, my commitment as a leader is to set you up for success and then to support you through the what's the word? Operationalization. That's not it. Through
It's a word
implementing.
today. It's a
Is
we make up
that
words
word?
all the time on this podcast. So
Okay.
we're going to make that a word today.
Okay. So as I implement the action plan to get goals achieved, right, I'm engaged in a process. And leaders who support people engaging in good processes and being aware of the process externally, how's it going? Are we getting the cross functional supports that we need? Uh, is the action plan going as intended? Am I struggling as an individual with part of that action plan? Leaders who support people with a setup for success and then the implementation of the plan to achieve that success and know people as people, that's the recipe for success. That's how we create good results, good outcomes.
Yeah, and all of that goes back to communication, which is what I talk about. I talk a lot about internal communications and just having those conversations. Like I know there's a living as a leader story that I use a lot in my trainings, and that's the story of a woman who was a high performer, was doing really well, and then slowly her performance started to slip. And it was over time, and it became where she was, irritable, and she wasn't working well with others, and she was late sometimes. And finally, the boss was like, instead of like saying, "What's going on? How can I support you?" It was like, "What's your problem?" And then she was like, "Well, let's talk about that. Like every day I work here for 8 hours and then I go home and I feed my children, I put them to bed, and then I go to my parents' house and I take care of my mother who is dying from cancer. So I give my father some relief. And then I go home and I sleep for a couple of hours and I get up and take a shower and I come back here and I do it all over again. And I do that every single day."
Yeah.
And so it was she was doing her best, but it was that communication that was lacking between the leadership and this worker to help them accommodate her for this period of time in her life, that she didn't just up and quit because the manager was like, "You're not performing well, so you gotta go." It was more of that, like, they formed an understanding of, "I didn't realize what was happening in your daily life, your outside your work life that impacted your work life. So how
Right.
can we make that work? How can I help you work that in, as an
Right.
understanding, knowing it was a temporary situation?" And I love that story so much because it's not about you should be doing this and you should be doing that. Why aren't you doing it? It was forming that understanding of, help me understand
Yeah.
instead of, the shoulding on there. And I think when you have that relationship with a leader, it goes from like, that toddler thing you're talking about, like, "I don't wanna, just because you told me I should do this doesn't mean I want
Yeah.
to do it," to that giving that power and that authentic confidence to go do it. It's that, gets that, like, "Hold my beer" mentality. Like, "Watch me
Yeah.
succeed because you've set me up for success." So
Right.
I think that's yeah, I think that's great. And if you're listening to this and it seems like we're going a little bit deep, we want you to fully understand in this is that it's not just about do this, this will happen. Once you fully understand the behavior and why you're doing it, you have to understand that process before you can make any real change. Sorry.
So what you're describing is a leader who did not know her people well enough to know that major life events were occurring in this individual.
Yeah. Yeah.
All she saw then was the outcome for this individual and the way the work was not being done the
Yeah.
way she was expecting. Okay. So one of my phrases from my therapy days was there's always reasonable reasons for unreasonable behavior. Okay.
Oh, I really like
Now,
that.
we should always, in all our relationships, right? There's
Yeah.
reasonable reasons for unreasonable behavior. As a
Yeah.
leader, that mindset would create curiosity. And the story is that the leader shifted from just being focused on outcomes to being concerned about the individual.
Hmm.
Hey, there's been a change in what you normally do. What's going on?
Yeah.
And then we find the reasonable reason.
Yeah.
And then once we know the reasonable reason or the process that the person's involved in that's no longer getting the results that we're used to, we can help create a new process, a new agreement. So as leaders, we don't manage people, we manage agreements. And
Yep.
that's a collaborative relationship instead of an authoritative control relationship.
Yeah.
That story's
That's
about
awesome.
that shift.
I love that. Okay. This is amazing insight, Rick. I really, I really do appreciate all of the experience that you've had because as you know, like the platform I'm standing on, and you could not knock me off of, is that every role in an organization influences revenue. And it starts with leadership understanding that. So, in your opinion, where have you seen that not understanding this unintentionally creates disconnect within teams?
Okay. Well, if we go back to what we talked about at the very beginning, leadership is really a service business.
Mhm.
As a leader, I serve the people that I lead. How do I serve them? By creating that setup for success. When I become self absorbed, I'm no longer in a service position. I'm in a me centered position. And so, how do I unintentionally impact teams when they're striving to achieve goals? If I'm me centered, I'm concerned not about the process that they're engaged in. I'm concerned about the outcomes that I'm getting. Outcomes are created by processes. Leadership is one eye focused on process and one eye focused on outcomes. And in our business world, we get so much communication around outcomes, outcomes, outcomes. What are the metrics? Are we hitting our numbers? Are we hitting our numbers? That we
Right.
grab at outcomes and revenues as if they have nothing to do with the process that's creating them. So if I'm a self absorbed leader, I am not engaged in a leadership process that supports me being emotionally intelligent with my people in knowing who they are and being curious about the challenges or obstacles that they're engaged in because results come through others. As a
Yeah.
leader, my job is to get results through others. If I'm self centered, I'm not focused on others. And so unintentionally, my self absorption, and let's face it, all of us tend to be self absorbed.
Yes.
We go through life from a me perspective. It takes a lot of maturity and probably a lot of skin knees to be able to shift that. And
Yeah.
when I shift it and I become other centered, my life goes a whole lot better. It's paradoxical. It's a paradoxical. Um, there's a wonderful quote by, I hope I'm going to get his name right, Ramandranath Tagore, who is the poet laureate of
Yeah.
India in the early 1900s. And this is, I love this quote. He said, I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I woke and found that life was service. I served and found that service was joy.
Mm,
So, how do you get to a happy life? You become service oriented. And so when I see people struggling, what are the reasonable reasons for unreasonable behavior? If I'm other centered, I'm curious about that. I'm curious about their well being, not just my own, because the results aren't being achieved.
right.
And so I engage with my people as essential partners in creating the outcomes. When I have an essential partner, I treat them with respect and curiosity, and I engage in collaboration. I engage in conversations. One of the big mistakes leaders make is they hear that there's some new initiative. They don't engage people on their teams relative to, hey, this is going to be a challenge. Let's talk about how we're going to handle this. They go
Yeah.
off in some corner. They do their best to try and create a message, often about selling, right? And when you're selling a change, guess what? Change puts people in difficult emotional positions because we're moving them out of their comfort zone. Change
Yeah.
makes people bad at their job. So then I sell how great it's going to be, and I'm selling over resistance. People have concerns. I don't want to hear their concerns. I just want to hear that they're on board with this change. So all of
Yeah.
this me-centered stuff gets in the way of engaging people collaboratively with emotional intelligence as partners in creating great outcomes, great results. And so, of course, as a leader, I am the filter through which organizational goals and needs are addressed. And if I'm me centered, I'm going to be unintentionally creating employees who are also me centered rather than engaged and caring about the well being of the organization and their boss.
Yeah, and it goes back to they're being told what to do instead of being asked to help with the process. Yeah, that is, and I find that it's because it's a learned behavior that we've done this, and we have to unlearn this behavior. Is that I see change, I have to sell it, like you said, to my people instead of bringing them in on the change and saying, "How are we going to make this work as a team?"
Right.
Like going back to the toddler example, it's being told what to do instead of involving them in the process.
Right. People know that their boss is interested in their perspective and the challenges they're going to face and takes on the responsibilities for overcoming the obstacles at their pay grade. Now we're building connection as we go through a change process, which inevitably is difficult, right? Because we're in learning
Right.
curves, we're in the unfamiliar, we're walking a blind path here. So let's
Yeah.
make one up together. Let's make the plan up together. Much
Yeah.
different experience than selling the wonders of the change versus engaging in a collaborative conversation about the challenges we'll face on this trip.
Yeah. And it's not about changing the end goal or the end result. It's about how do we get there in the
Right.
most effective way. It's yeah, that's where
Right.
you bring in the team is in like how do we accomplish versus let's change what the accomplishment needs to be. Yeah. No, absolutely 100%. Because if you're a leader on this and you're listening to this podcast and you're like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. I'm doing this right, then great, keep listening. If you're kind of resonating with this going, ooh, that might be me, you know, you're probably still listening. And let's be honest, the people who go, nope, I don't want to hear it, it's probably like they turned this podcast off a while ago
Yeah.
because they want to just ignore it. So with those leaders that are doing something right, or the leaders that are identifying with what we're talking about and saying, ooh, that might be me, like what is one thing, one or maybe even two things that they can implement immediately that doesn't require a lot of learning and training and things like that. What's like one or two quick tips that they could go and implement at their office to help with this concept of that leaders, that change starts with leadership and understanding that every role touches revenue. Like, what are a couple of things that they can do themselves to get some quick wins?
Sure. So, first of all, let me say this. If someone out there is listening and says, ooh, that might be me, congratulations. That's a
Yeah.
humble position. That's a self aware position. Awareness is not change, but it is the prerequisite for change. So, good for you. If you can say, oops, yep, I can see it. That represents again, and I think self-awareness is a non-negotiable leadership quality.
Yeah.
Okay. Humility then to look in the mirror and say, yeah, I think I'm doing that. Now you have the opportunity to improve, right? And so I would suggest that the simplest way to implement what we've talked about is reserve some time on your calendar and ask the members of your team that you lead, reserve some time for connecting with them.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
connecting with them. Build relationships. Now, the relationship building can be about their personal life to the extent that they want to share, or it can be about their work experience. What's a challenge that you're dealing with right now? What have you overcome? Um, what's the biggest frustration that you have, right? It can be about talking to them about their experience in life, whether it's at home or at work. Build relationships, I would say, is one thing. Reserve some time so that people know you care about them as people. The other thing that you can do is positive recognition that's genuine and specific is a great relationship builder, and it lets people know what you value. That's the question about positive recognition. And so here's the
Mm.
question people can hold in their mind to ensure that they're giving a specific and genuine positive recognition. What is this person doing that I appreciate? It's that simple. If you have the answer to that question and you share that answer with people, you will be specific and genuine. The Gallup organization said if you want a high performing team, one positive recognition per person per week is a minimum standard that you should be shooting for.
Minimum
And
standard.
so if I
Audience, minimum
build
standard. Yes.
minimum standard, right? At
Go.
least one,
Okay.
and that's everybody on your team. So
Well,
the
okay, no,
thought
okay. So, like,
is,
I'm going to stop you just for a second because
oh,
we have had this conversation before, you and I, that a team is not just the people who report up to you. They're also your team is that cross functional same level, the people who
yeah,
you work side by side with, shoulder to shoulder, other leaders of other departments, kind of a thing. So it's very important to formulate that cross functional team positive aspect too. Is to do it not only just in your downward report, but also across the people who are you're leading with. Would you agree
yes.
with that?
Absolutely. And most of the time, when you ask leaders, who is your primary team, they talk about the people that they lead. They think vertically,
Yeah,
they don't think horizontally.
they don't.
My primary team needs to be my peers because it's our collaboration cross functionally that is often the challenge. If we're going to accomplish ambitious goals, it's inevitable that we will have internal customers and suppliers. If I don't have a good customer supplier relationship internally, then the critical pieces of interdependence cross functionally get missed, and organizational goals and revenues and leaders suffer
Yeah.
because we're having to do things without essential services. I worked for a while in the printing industry, and it doesn't just apply to the printing industry. But the motto was we didn't have time to do it right the first time. So if we're right, so if we're going to do it right the first time, we have to have strong
Oh man.
interdependent relationships. So building relationships with peers, and peers are often the biggest struggle for
Yes.
leaders, right?
Because they
My
have their
vertical
own list of
relationship.
goals and KPIs and things that they have to accomplish. They don't want to worry about yours. Because
That's
I've
right.
added something to my what triggers me list, and it's the stay in your lane concept of leaders. Like when I hear leaders say like you just need to stay in your lane. Well, my lane is right next to all these other lanes, and I need to like it that yeah, do your job. I'm not saying do anybody else's job. What I'm saying is that, but you need to have an understanding of who's in all the other lanes. And if you only focus on you cause a disconnect that you were just talking about, that cross functional disconnect. And honestly, if we don't understand how our job affects the next role that it gets played in the process of whatever you're selling, the service or the product you're developing, if you don't understand how your role affects the next role that that we once I done my job, it goes here. Like if you don't understand how that affects that, and you don't understand how like their job over here has to get done before I can do my job, there. Oh my gosh, I have seen so many. I've had to fix so many leadership teams that have that mentality of stay in your lane, and it's that's my new trigger thing. Anyway,
Well, sure. So, I mean, I just drove from Rice Lake down to Waukesha yesterday, and stay in your lane. If we have that mindset when somebody needs to merge into mine, I'm going to make sure they don't because it's my lane, right? There's that
yeah,
self centered orientation again, but now we're talking about it cross functionally. And
yeah,
there's a price to pay anytime we're not collaborating because business is a collaborative, relationship driven sport. And so if
yeah.
we're going to play well on a team, we have to understand the team isn't my group. The team is us. It's the entire enterprise.
Yeah. Yeah, revenue is a team sport for sure.
Yeah.
Because you can take any sports metaphor, soccer, baseball, football, I don't know lacrosse much about lacrosse, but you have to understand the role of those other people. I mean, basketball, there's a reason that the point guard does what he does or she does and you know what I mean? And so by the way, that's the only basketball like position I actually know. Um So
I won't
it
go into
doesn't
I won't
matter.
go into detail. Yeah.
So what's happening is that what I like about this is so much is that once you have this baseline understanding of what Rick is talking about, you can apply it easily. But it's the awareness. And I love that you said congratulations if it resonates with you, because that really is a humbling mentality, and it's a really good start to being a great leader. Okay, so we need to wrap this section up a little bit here. Do you have a story of this when this happened to a client and you've seen like the end result and how it's affected not only interpersonal relationships with the cross-functional teams, but like real tangible results either in revenue growth or product growth? Like what is the business result of having this understanding?
So I worked with one company up in Stevens Point, and they didn't want to impact production time. And so they wanted me to come up and do 6 hours of training Saturdays, 4 Saturdays in a row.
Ouch.
So I gave them positive recognition. I taught positive recognition. What is this person doing that I appreciate? And they made the commitment that they would give every person under their leadership one positive recognition per week. So
Okay.
I came back the second week and I said, "How's it going?" And they said, "Well, the people are looking at me and going like, what's going on?
Yeah.
What do you want? You want me to work overtime? What's going on?" And I said, "Okay, they're not used to it. Let them know you're developing as a leader and you understand the importance of positive recognition. Are you willing to keep going?" And they all said yes. So I go back to the third Saturday and I said, "How's it going with positive recognition?" And they said they're coming in with more smiles on their faces. The mood is up. They're collaborating better. They're giving me more information. They're coming up to me with ideas, and I see them giving positive recognitions to each other.
Oh,
I said,
that's
"Great.
cool.
One more week. Let's do it. One more week." And they said yes. I came back
Okay.
for the final week of training, and they said they're not only giving positive recognition to each other, they're starting to give positive recognition to me.
Oh,
Right? So when all now this was all leaders. If you give all leaders in an organization one song to sing, within a month, you can profoundly change the culture as they did in this company up in Stevens Point by all leaders doing one thing, positive recognition. And so impact on revenue is clear. More information, people feel valued. And guess what? If I feel like you value me, I'm going to engage with you more to let you know once more, I'm even more valuable than you thought.
yeah.
And now we have that collaborative exchange relative to achieving great outcomes and bringing in the revenue numbers. Revenue numbers, outcomes are based on processes.
Yeah.
And leadership is the process to engage others to get desired results. And what does leadership take? Keep relationships positive, set people up for success, and be aware of what their challenges are, give them feedback along the way to either remove obstacles, internal or external, and positive recognition. And now we're a team that has a great process. Great processes create great outcomes. Bottom line.
Well, and that goes back to what I said before about like what is something really simple you can do. You know, you said sit down with your team and talk to them as a human and all the things. But that's that right there, that one positive thing.
Yep,
So,
absolutely.
Rick, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Your insights are always so enlightening. I learn something every time I talk to you. So, why don't you tell the audience about what's going on at Living as a Leader? Is there anything that you're promoting or any courses coming up? And how can they reach you guys?
Thanks for that opportunity. We do have an emerging leader series. So, people who are transitioning from individual contributors to leaders, we create foundational courses. Self awareness, number one, right? How am I doing as a
Hmm.
leader? What are the potential vulnerabilities? And we create development plans. Essential to leadership is the ability to coach. And so, foundational coaching, what's coaching? It's the ability to listen and ask questions so that a person thinks their way into a new behavior
Mm.
or
Yep.
achieving a new goal. Coaching is not training in our rubric. Coaching is helping people learn rather that through conversation rather than just teaching them. Okay. So we have
Yeah.
a strong section, two strong workshops on coaching and foundational workshops for new leaders. So we have a new series coming up. I can give you the link that you could add
Yeah.
in
We'll
your
put it
thread.
in the
bottom section of that. Yeah, of the
That'd be great.
podcast.
We have our full series available, and we have a new video learning series we call Leader Track Lens, which is much more individuated and people can take it at their own pace. And so, yeah, we'll give you a Leader Track Lens link as well as the live in-person training that we've been doing, for a good 25 years.
Oh
So there's
yeah,
a lot of options. Living as a leader is creating some new ways to make leadership development a smaller footprint, easier to digest given time frames and cost. And and Cindy, who is one of my colleagues, I think you know Cindy.
I love. She's
She
lovely.
is the face of living as a leader, and we call her Hollywood. She does great as a video trainer. It's a video trainer.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
thanks, appreciate
She's
that.
amazing. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
of course. And quite honestly, working at Living as a Leader for all those years, I did attend the training as well. And what I find really important about that is that the thing that's different is that they're not telling you what to do. They're inviting you to make a change. And it's not about like, did you do it or not? It's the what was the challenge? How did it go? How can we work through the challenge? And then how did you implement it? And there's an accountability aspect to it as well, which is amazing. So it's very, like you said, change is hard, but it's
Yeah.
the change that I've seen from the leaders who've gone through the leaders Living as a Leader program. I'm actually working with a couple of them right now. It's so funny. As Rebel Girl Marketing, I actually have two people that I network with that I knew from the Living as a Leader program
Mhm.
I sold. And so it's really fun seeing them now as entrepreneurs and leaders in their own right. So again, Rick, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I truly appreciate you, not only as an expert, but as a friend. So thank you so
Always
much.
glad to connect with you again, Lisa, and enjoy our collaboration in the past. And certainly this was a lot of fun today. So thanks for having
Great.
me on.
Absolutely.
Isn't Rick amazing? I mean, the things he knows about leadership is just amazing. And what I love about what we talked about is not just about the how and the what of leadership and how it applies to revenue, but it's the why. Once we understand why it's so important, it's easier to the time to step back and take a look at your own client experience and see how it's affected by if everybody in your team understands how their role touches revenue. So that wraps up this episode of the Pitch to Purchase podcast. I appreciate you, my loving audience. So it's time to raise the bar and maybe even a little hell. Thanks for listening.